I think it's easy to get lost in the weeds of this franchise's story, the minute details and vague clues that hint towards shadow truths and a plethora of possiblies and perhapses. God knows that theorists have exuded an exorbitant amount of blood, sweat, and tears when it comes to solving the mysteries of Five Nights at Freddy's. But long-standing mysteries aside, what is the point? Now, of course, you're probably wondering what I mean by that. Isn't theorizing and talking about the lore the entire point? It's fun, it's interesting, and it makes the two brain-celled organisms on Twitter mad whenever I rage bait them about a topic in the series. Granted, that's all true, and perhaps that's where your dopamine shot ends when it comes to what you get out of the series. But more so, I'm talking about the point of the story itself. You see, when it comes to any sort of story in any sort of medium, whether it be a video game, a movie, a book, there tends to be some sort of message, a life lesson or theme built throughout the entire narrative. It doesn't necessarily have to be a life-altering message that you're supposed to take with you after the experience is over, but overarching themes do tend to empower and strengthen a story, which ultimately aids in it being more memorable and impactful. It helps the consumer become more invested when they're able to talk about and pick apart the deeper meanings that a story might have. Look at games like Silent Hill 2, Fallout New Vegas, What Remains of Edith Finch, BioShock, Undertale, Mouthwashing, Detroit Become Human, and so many more. All of those examples I listed range from being stories about ideological stances to emotional journeys that dive deep into the human psyche. But that begs the question, does FNaF belong in that list too? Does it even have a chance? Like the wise Mr. Hippo once said, not every story has to have meaning or significance. Sometimes a story is just a story. But then again, if that was wholly true, the series really would have ended at Pizzeria Simulator or Ultimate Custom Night. As you might already be aware, FNaF doesn't tell its story in a straightforward manner. Quite the opposite, actually. When you play the first game, there's barely any story in it. All we get are a few phone calls and newspaper clippings. We see Golden Freddy and hear about the mysterious bite of 87, but we seldom are actually given anything in terms of answers to either of the two topics. Those aforementioned newspaper clippings tell us about 5 children disappearing at the restaurant, but it wouldn't be until way later that we find out who was behind those disappearances. Case in point, if we're going to derive any sort of special meaning or theme out of the series, we can't focus on one particular game because that's not really how FNAF's story works. With that in mind, we're going to focus on the original story told between games 1 to UCN. I'm going to make the disclaimer now that I'll definitely be making some assumptions and possibly some hefty claims in regards to certain aspects of the story. This isn't so much a theory as it is an analysis of the series, so try not to get too offended when I say some possibly controversial stuff. That said, it's time to make my first claim. The original story of Five Nights at Freddy's is about the Afton family. That's a pretty reasonable and understandable assumption in my opinion. Maybe it's even what the Gen Zers might call a cold take. I've even seen people say that the main character of the original series is its villain, aka William Afton. Starting at FNAF 2, we certainly do see that purple menace quite a lot going forward. In one way or another, he basically appears in every entry of the franchise, whether it be as an 8-bit sprite or a rotten decayed bunny rabbit. There's merit to that idea, but I wouldn't say Afton is our primary protagonist. Instead, that honor goes to Michael Afton. Yeah, I know, we're definitely breaking a lot of new ground with this video so far. A tale as old as time, it's common knowledge by now that we play as Michael in a majority of the original games. At the very least, we play as Mike in FNAF 1, 4, SL, and Pizzeria Simulator. I would add FNAF 3 to that mix, but I know that one is a little bit more debatable nowadays. There is, of course, a reason why I bring all this up. Contrary to popular belief, I do think characters like William and Michael have this magical thing called personality and characterization. When it comes to themes and stories, a lot of the time the way characters act and the actions they take play into the theme a narrative might be trying to get across. Generally speaking, Michael is a much more sympathetic character compared to his father. We seldom directly hear much from him, but the speech we hear at the end of Sister Location location's custom night paints Michael in a very solemn way. Every word he speaks is tired and soft. The somber music that plays and the tone of his voice sells the idea that this is a much more tragic and broken character compared to William. Furthermore, we know Michael carries a lot of guilt and regret over the mistakes of his youth, i.e. killing his younger brother. In FNAF 4's final minigame, he even says "I'm sorry" to his younger brother before the crying child inevitably flatlines. The connection between Mike and his brother carries over to the movie as well. Mike's whole motive for coming back to Freddy's in the film is because he's trying to find out what happened to his brother all those years ago. The circumstances are different, but the same applies to the games as well. Why does Mike work in the FNAF 1 location? Well, it's because he was called there in his dreams, i.e. the dream sequences from FNAF 2, where we see from the perspective of Freddy on stage in the FNAF 1 building. Michael takes up the night shift at Freddy's, eager and desperate to find out what's become of his brother. His brother died years ago and it was Michael's fault, and yet it's quite possible something of his brother remains, something that has to do with Freddy's. But alas, Michael gets fired at the end of his first week working as the nighttime security guard, but the terror doesn't end when he leaves Freddy's, because now the terror has followed him home. Michael proceeds to suffer from horrific nightmares involving twisted, monstrous versions of the animatronics he had previously been fending off in the waking world. We even see a nightmarish version of the very animatronic bear that Michael had shoved his younger brother's head into, that being Golden Freddy, or rather Fredbear. Not only that, but he comes face to face with yet another version of Freddy, at least it looks like one, Nightmare, a dark, shadowy version of Fredbear with the only difference being a color palette switch. This, in reality, is Shadow Freddy. Shadow Freddy is what followed Mike home, and it's what gave him these nightmares. But at the end of it all, after surviving the nightmare, we're finally met with the answers Michael has been searching for. Locked in a box, the true story of Five Nights at Freddy's, whatever that may look like, resides within this chest. The pieces of the mystery exist inside this box, put together but locked away. Alas, there's no way for us, the player, to open this box. Years after FNAF 4's release, there's been a ton of theories and even answers from Scott as to what the box really is, but whatever the case may be, it is, in its simplest form, the pieces of FNAF's story wrapped in a nice little bow. But even if we could open that box, would it be worth it? If Michael knew what really happened to his brother, if he found all the answers he was searching for, would it be worthwhile? Would it matter? It's always been a question whether or not the box is a literal object within the world of FNAF, or something that exists outside of it in a metaphorical sense. Whatever the case may be, perhaps some things are best left forgotten for now. That's what the box represents, or rather, the decision to leave the box alone. It represents Michael letting the past go. He doesn't need to know exactly what happened to his brother, but maybe one day in the future this trauma and horror can be revisited. I think Mike in the movie mirrors this as well. For most of the plot, he's chasing this thread, this possibility of finding the man who took Garrett. For years, Mike had been reliving the same day over and over again in his mind, repeating the same dream every night he slept in hopes of finding the truth. But when faced with the opportunity to live in a happy memory with his family, with his brother, he refuses. And by the end of the film, he's finally able to let go of the past and move on. Being stuck in the past and desperately hanging on to things that can't be changed had nearly cost Mike not only his own life, but the life of his own sister. In a similar fashion, Michael in the games risks his own life every night he goes back to Freddy's. Michael shackled himself with guilt, blaming himself for the death of his younger brother all those years ago. In both instances / continuities, Michael lets go of his childhood trauma with the promise that maybe one day he'll revisit the pain and suffering that destroyed his entire family. On the flip side of that, we have William Afton. If it isn't obvious, William is the exact opposite of Michael. Michael. Bro cannot let anything go. In books like The Silver Eyes, we see just how jealous and envious he was of Henry, and how his pettiness ran so deep that he killed Henry's daughter due to that jealousy. In the movie universe, we see that Freddy's has long since been closed down, and yet the owner of the building just can't seem to let the place go yet. Must be some sort of sentimental guy, I guess. Already we've kind of painted a picture of the type of character William is. He's insecure, he's petty, and he's selfish. But he's also intelligent in his own right. He did, after all, get away with murder a crap ton times over. He also made very advanced animatronics of his own, specifically designed to lure, capture, and kill children. Why did he do that, you may ask? Well, it was all in the name of science. Now, I say that somewhat jokingly, but it isn't entirely inaccurate either. Quote, "The most terrible accidents sometimes bear the most beautiful fruits. Recreating the accident, that is the duty and honor of science. To replicate the experiment and obtain the same result. I give my life to this experiment, piece by piece." This is from the Fourth Closet novel, when Afton is talking to Jessica after she's been kidnapped. In this story, he's trying to reenact the spark of life that Henry supposedly found when he was creating the lifelike Charlie robots. Robots that serve the sole purpose of replacing his dead daughter. It's very likely that something similar happens in the games. In that regard, I personally believe that spark of life is the crying child's death, but that's neither here nor there. The important part of this is Afton's attitude regarding his actions. Bear in mind that he's referring to the dead children he's killed and imprisoned in these robots as if they were nothing more than a science project. For Afton, all this bloodshed and violence and tragedy has been in the name of science, to recreate that spark of life and achieve what no man has ever accomplished before, that being immortality. Afton is fascinated by the paranormal. The paranormal in FNAF's case is an untouched science of its own, one that Afton is hellbent on learning more of. That's why he created the Funtime animatronics, and it's also why he has an entire bunker dedicated to carrying out experiments trying to replicate what happened to the crying child. Make no mistake, Afton is most certainly a monster that relishes the pain and suffering that he causes, but as we see in something like the Fourth Closet, it's with the justification that it's all in the name of science. Now, you might be wondering why I bring all this up. What does this have to do with what we talked about before with Michael and the overall topic of the video? Well, like I said before, William is a man who just can't let things go. He doesn't know how to, it's just not in his nature. He's too self-absorbed and dedicated to his work to even think about letting sleeping dogs lie. He has to know. Even when one of his own creations takes the life of his daughter, Afton continues his work. When his own body is trapped and bound to the very suit he used to commit his crimes, even that's not enough to keep him down forever. But what a lot of people fail to understand is that Afton never really succeeds in his goals. He gets spring-locked before he's ever able to continue further with his experiments. Yeah, he gets away with killing a bunch of kids, but he never finds that spark of life. He's never truly able to recreate what happened to the crying child, nor is he ever able to harness the power of souls and remnant properly. Afton chases a far-fetched, distant dream. He chases success and glory without a care in the world about who he has to hurt or what sinful acts he has to commit in order to achieve his goals. In his head, it's all for science's sake, but in endlessly pursuing this knowledge and power, he brings about the demise of not only innocent people and not only his own family, but his own inevitable doom as well. Afton shows us what searching for unnecessary answers does to someone. Unlike Michael, who was able to let go of the past and move on, Afton stays trapped in it, forever living with his victims in the very mystery he helped create. It consumes him to the point that, eventually, he's not even human anymore. He's an unrecognizable monster whose depravity knows no bounds. I'd also like to say that although I do believe all this to be an aspect of William's character, there's more to him that I'm not covering here. His performative nature, his egotism and his charisma, and his social facade are all things I'm somewhat leaving out here because what we've talked about is what I wanted to focus on for this video. That aside, I think you can probably guess the conclusion I've been leading us towards throughout the video. If you don't agree with it, that's totally alright. At the end of the day, this is simply what I've derived from the narrative, and being that it's FNaF, you can probably look at the story and extract your own themes and ideas from it just as I have. But, in my opinion, FNaF's overarching theme is about being able to let go of the past and move on with life. Getting stuck in the past won't do you any favors. Chasing answers and truths won't bring you satisfying clarity. Even if you had those answers, would you accept them? Would it change what happened? Would it really help you move on? Or would it trap you? Would you become enslaved to the past? In search of answers to the mysteries that plague you, would you let your undying need consume you to the point of sacrificing yourself and those around you? Whatever your answer might be, that, my friends, is the theme at the core of FNaF's original story. In that sense, Michael Afton really is the perfect protagonist in terms of what FNaF is going for. Not only is he the set of eyes we see through for most of the games, but he truly does represent the player, at least for these older games. The ancestral theorists of yesteryear used to pick apart every nook and cranny they could in these simple point-and-click experiences. We hung on every voice line, grasped onto every still image and 8-bit pixel. Much like Michael, we too were desperate to seek answers and solve the mystery of Freddy's. Although we got tidbits and crumbs and some reveals, we were never shown the full picture. It exists, but would we accept the actual truth? Maybe you're thinking you would, considering the flame wars and endless arguments that have transpired in the community. Maybe you're someone who would prefer that's a new one. Prefer any sort of answer instead of more vagueness. But consider this. Consider how hard some people debate and how passionate they are. Consider all the headcanons and minimally supported claims some people have. There's still people who believe in Mike Victim all these years later. There's people who think Charlie died in 1987, and people who think the MCI took place in 1983. There's people who still think Dream Theory was Scott's intention with FNaF 4, and that it was the retcon he spoke of in that one Reddit post. All that to say that when it comes to FNaF, even if something might seem obvious or clear to some people, there's always going to be the left field, if you know what I mean. And you know what? Maybe that's okay. That's just the nature of fandom after all, and more often than not, people make their AUs and crackpot theories out of love for the franchise as opposed to spite. Of course, maybe I'm just a crazed theorist trying to apply interesting narrative analysis to the silly Pizza Bear game. Either way, I think it's always important to remember that FNAF's story is more than just the puzzle pieces and plot devices the fans sometimes relegate it to. At the end of the day, it's a story, and even if what we talked about isn't necessarily the case, I think it's fun to analyze the narrative like this. I think it offers a slightly different perspective to existing topics in the series, and I think it might even give new insight that one might miss out on during traditional theory crafting. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed the video. Don't forget to hit that like button on your way out, and if you have any thoughts or opinions of your own, I'd love to hear them in the comments below. If you're feeling really generous, I'd appreciate you also giving that subscribe button a gentle tap too, but I'm not picky. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have a good day or a good night, whichever it is for you. Either way, I will see you all next time. Peace out.